Welcome to Radical Feminist Perspectives. Today, we are going to hear about the menopause industry, how the medical establishment exploits women by Sandra Coney. It's being discussed by Renate Klein and Sheila Jeffries. And unfortunately, Sandra Coney, on some ads, we said she could be here, but she can't be here today. But she's wishing us a great webinar. So thank you so much, Renate and Sheila, and over to you two.
Hello, everyone, and I'm very happy to discuss this very important book with Sheila. Yes, I'm very sorry that Sandra can't be here because I had already quite a few questions for her, but we'll have to do it without her. So I will give a short overview of Sandra's book, and Sheila will then add comments in between. Sandra Coney's Menopause Industry was first published in 1991 by Penguin, New Zealand. Then Spinifex Press published the next edition in 1993, and we sold rights to Hunter House in the United States in 94. And that is the edition that is still available. Unfortunately, we have sold out, which is very rare for us because mostly we keep our books, but that book we just don't have copies anymore. Now, I will start by giving a short overview of Sandra's book, and Sheila will insert comments. Firstly, I want to start with saying quite categorically that with some very few exceptions, Sandra's book has passed the test of time really well. How she frames menopause was highly important in the 1990s, and it remains highly important today. Menopause, Sandra says, is not a disease. The midlife woman is turned into a disease bearer by the medical establishment and big pharma, who then medicalizes women for decades, and some say actually they must be medicalized for life. And yeah, period. Because women have been and continue to be conditioned to think that, quote, doctor knows best, even before they have any menopausal symptoms, when they are in their mid-40s and have a headache or feel anxious or depressed, they think that the menopause is upon them and that they better do something about that. That means seeing a doctor. Fear has set in. Before I get into the book, here's a general thought by Sandra that I think is well worth thinking about. Because, especially as women, we have been so well trained to be obedient. Many of us traipse to the doctor once a year to get our round of blood tests done. Not because we feel sick, but because we have been told that testing and screening acts as prevention. I did this for many years whilst living in Melbourne. Susan, my partner, and I had a nice GP whom we had trained really well. Luckily for us, there was never anything really wrong with any of our tests, but I do remember being a bit worried about the ups and downs of my cholesterol. Our GP knew better than to suggest any medication such as statins, as she knew pretty well that I would never take any statins. But I have to ask myself, what was the point of these tests? Was it to find out if well people, which I was, minus my arthritis, perhaps did something wrong with them that could or should be treated with some drug? As I said, statins for bad cholesterol, or perhaps even medication for pre-diabetes, or more tests for something that might be a problem or might become one. As I said, there was never a problem, so we were lucky. When we moved to the Australian tropics, things were very different. The local medical centre changed doctors very quickly, and when we finally liked one, a man who looked like a teddy bear and seemed trainable, he left too. I had a very bad experience with a female doctor, And we are now seeing another older male doctor once a year for our driver's license, because we have to do that in Queensland. If you're over 74, you have to see, you have to have an annual checkup with a doctor for a driver's license. Very, very annoying. So no continuity, no blood test, no one mentioned them. And I have actually decided I won't have tests anymore. If I feel sick and truly in need of seeing a doctor, I'll see one. I don't need diseases discovered in me that I may or may not ever get. I've made it to almost 81, which is a pretty good age. Now, Sheila, over to you.
Thanks very much, Renata. So hello, everybody. Good to be with you. Now, this is, I think, I'm very pleased that this book's being discussed, and I was the one who suggested it because I do think it's a quite exceptional book. I don't know of another that completely rejects the notion of menopause as a disease that women need to be treated for. There is Germaine Greer's The Change, and that was published in the same year, 1991. And it was better known because she was famous. But I don't remember her book being nearly as good. In fact, I barely remember the content of her book at all. She did not have the same direct rejection of the medicalized notion of menopause that Coney has. I began to teach the book on my sexual politics course as soon as I read it in Australia. I was very impressed. I thought, this is what we need. This is what we need. I taught it as part of a week in my course called The Politics of Women's Bodies, which covered medicalization, abortion, surrogacy. At that time, feminist women's health politics were still really strong. And the feminist rejection of the medicalization of menopause was quite general. I do remember meeting a few US feminists who took HRT, but I certainly knew no feminists in Australia who did. Feminists did not do that. We all understood what was wrong with it. We understood that it was a way of Big Pharma making profits from persuading women they were ill. And we knew that it would definitely turn out to have serious health risks. We just were waiting for them. And of course they came. I remember when I first realized the pressure women were under. It was when I went to my woman doctor in the mid-90s, not the sort of woman doctor that Renata was lucky enough to have, but I deliberately chose a woman. I was in my late 40s and I went about some minor ailment, and she suggested that I consider going on HRT. I was absolutely horrified because I didn't expect such anti-feminism from a woman doctor, and especially not when I had the flu. So I expected her to know what I knew. When I said it, I jerked backwards as if I'd been stung. And I said forcefully, but I'm a feminist. I thought that was all you needed to say at the time, but I'm a feminist, because it was generally understood in feminism what a horror the medicalization of menopause was. So I was saying, how could she offer me such a thing? But she did. And if she was offering that to me, she must have been offering it to all her other women patients when they reached a certain age. I presume that's starting to happen again now with the industrialization of menopause right now. So I had my first hot flush in the Philippines in 1995 when I was 47. I was on a study tour of sex tourism, and I just arrived at the accommodation with a huge suitcase, and it was blistering hot and, of course, humid as well. And I was absolutely astonished at the time. It was truly astonishing, this incredible meltdown that I had. But then I didn't have flushes again for quite a few years. So that was just the one occasion. Now, I was thinking when I was looking at this, since I was thinking, did I know anybody who was on HRT and so on? I was wondering whether, Renata, how the feminists around you understood menopause at the time. Were any of them on HRT?
No, Sheila, I didn't know anybody who was on HRT. And most of the women that I knew at the time, they had read Sandra's book and they had read German Greer's book. And we were all totally opposed to women becoming medicalized. So no, none of us was even thinking of going on HRT. So I'll continue with the book, and maybe Joe, you could just show the Spinifex cover, but unfortunately we don't have copies anymore. So the only copies you can buy at the moment is the one from the States, from Hunter House, that you showed at the beginning. Thank you. So Sandra writes that midlife women are well women in need of being declared estrogen deficient by the medical profession. And once this pronouncement is made, a battery of tests with subsequent scripts for pills and patches follows. If they create adverse effects, well, there is always another brand and perhaps another test. So midlife women are turned into walking laboratories in need of ongoing surveillance and medicalization. And the women are now called sick, not well anymore. She describes this really well, how well women are turned into sick women. And unfortunately, it's exactly the same today. So here are the sections of Sandra's book. It starts with part 1, Women at Midlife, followed by part 2, Menopause. Next, osteoporosis. Now that's a really important of the book. I'll get to that. And then part 4, hormone replacement therapy. She has got part 5 called screening programs, but it's not really about menopause, and we've decided to leave that out. It also does need updating. And then the book ends with a few short final thoughts. So I'll start with part 1, Women at Midlife. Sandra declares that her mission statement is the following, and this is a quote. The menopause industry of the title of this book refers to medicine's discovery of the midlife woman in all its manifestations and the vested interest it serves. It is called an industry because it is managed, marketed, and makes profits. For the midlife woman, it is a paradox, for it contains both potential benefits and potential harms. The trick is to gain the first while avoiding the second. This book is offered as a tool for women to employ in accomplishing this task. I mean, this could have been written yesterday. It is so absolutely topical. She also has some sensible words to say about choice and that it can't be free. Here is another quote. The menopause industry is about the colonization of a sex. I like that. The redefining of a normal life as a medical event. It is difficult for women to make choices freely when they have been subjected to a demoralizing propaganda campaign aimed at brainwashing them into accepting that they are deficient. Again, same today. So to comply with the system, the now declared estrogen deficient midlife woman needs a battery of tests. Those women who refuse, like Sheila and me, are called reckless and are said to jeopardize their lives. We're still here. In fact, Sandra says they are labeled deviant. All still true today. The psychological effect of focusing on illness rather than on how they feel, which is well and in good health, turns women away from focusing on their resilience. We all need resilience. Next comes the push for prevention. Might be better to start taking hormones now so that any nasties won't develop, which of course is an unproven claim. There is no guarantee. You never know if a nasty develops this evening or tomorrow. You just don't. After that comes one of the few instances in the book where Sandra's views need to be updated. On page 26, she says, and it's a quote, "The bits of the person that break down get sent to the body shop to get fixed. But the soul of the person, question mark? Well, today the soul gets fixed too, and far too quickly, in our view. Just think of the endless diagnoses for ADHD and autism that adult women face these days. I am sure this is not what Sandra had in mind when she mentioned the soul, but the soul is now being fixed too. So what we have is the further and further medicalization of well women whose only problem is that they are in their mid-40s to 50s. In the next chapter, Sandra looks at the perception that midlife women have of themselves. What stood out for me was how the lesbians she talked to felt much less harassed about having to fit in with sexual stereotypes than their heterosexual sisters. Still true. We're definitely not scrutinized as much as heterosexual women about our looks and if men who find us desirable. I mean, who cares? One of the many advantages of being a lesbian. So now we move to part 2, menopause, which looks specifically into what this term actually means. It turns out that beyond saying your periods have stopped, which is the exact translation from Greek. Meno means months and pause means stop. There is no diagnosis of what menopause is. It is medicine who introduced the myth of the estrogen deficient model, which defies precise definition. When and how much estrogen is reduced depends very much on culture, race, the general health of each woman, living circumstances, etc. And I'll say more later about the new form of estrogen called estrone that midlife women produce. That's good news. The point is that menopause signals the end of fertility and childbearing. Since within a patriarchal mindset, women continue to be seen primarily as breeders, just think of surrogacy, for conventional women who do see their main aim in life as childbearing, knowing that this come to an end can have a big negative impact. Needless to say that many other heterosexual women welcome the end of periods, no more pain. It also heralds the good news that contraception is no longer necessary. But medicine trumps the good news with its deficiency model. As Sandra puts it, quote, "The current model of menopause is neither scientific or neutral. It is ideological, a strategy for enforcing women's compliance to medical treatment and acceptance of their social role." That's a fantastic sentence. Really, it is ideological. Take hot flushes. There is no agreement what actually causes it and how many women suffer from hot flushes very badly, tolerably, or only mildly annoyingly. It's a very small number, around 10% or fewer, for which hot flushes are a real problem during the day and at night. For most others, yes, as Sheila said before, hot flushes can be a nuisance, but in winter, they can help with heating costs. Feminists sometimes call them power surges, and once they have calmed down, talk of postmenopausal cyst. Sandra is slightly critical of this and says that for women who do suffer, such terms sound unsisterly and a bit callous. And she may have a point, although I quite like power searchers. Sheila.
Thanks. So I thought I'd just say something about what was going on at the university where I was teaching when I went into menopause. I was on the Equal Opportunities Committee and on the Women's Studies Committee, and there were lots of women of menopausal age there, lots of women in their late 40s, 50s, and so on. And we were feminists. I mean, that's why we were on those committees, and of course, therefore, there was a rejection of the medicalization of menopause. In fact, we mostly treated it as something rather triumphant. And if we were having hot flushes in university meetings, as we were bound to do, some of us, we would indeed say we were having power surges to explain why we had sweaty faces. And we would just sit there and say, "Oh, I'm having a power surge," and everybody would grin and laugh and so on. That's how we treated it at that time. And the men got really used to it if they were in those meetings. They had to, because we weren't going to rush out of the room in shame to sort ourselves out. We were just sort of very cheerful. Now, and we talked about these things with each other at the time. We laughed, we understood the politics. I can't imagine that now. I don't think women going through menopause are chatting to each other from a feminist point of view and sort of making light of them and so on, because they're not encouraged to do that. Not anymore. It's become something incredibly serious, as we will talk about a bit more later on.
Yes, thanks, Sheila. And actually, it has never been proven that hormone replacement therapy, HRT, about which we will hear more later, helps with hot flushes. But still, doctors say it does, and women swallow the pills or put the patches on. And I saw in the chat that some women said that their mothers or sisters had a really horrible time at menopause. I think neither Sheila or I are saying that's not possible, but there are really very, very few women who do that. And I still think that if you constantly hear that menopause is going to be horrible, you might actually, as I said earlier, if you had a bad night, then you can't sleep, then you might think, oh God, now I have menopause and I have to do something. So there's a lot what
Can
sort
I
of
just interject
fermenting.
something here? I think that the most serious thing I heard of from any of my friends at that time was that they would have extremely heavy periods as their
Yeah,
periods were coming to an end, which were really inconvenient, inconvenient stains on their trousers and goodness knows what. I did know a few women who had that, and then that went away and they got through it. But that was certainly a really unfortunate side effect of going through
yeah,
menopause.
yeah. But the problem is that nobody says that actually, and I don't even have that in the talk. Sandra doesn't talk about this. If you start an HRT and let's say you are feeling better, who knows? The minute you stop HRT, all the symptoms are back. The hot flushes, the not being able to sleep, whatever else you had. So it's not that it cures it, it just postpones it. And so, I mean, it's no good. It's just better if you do have some symptoms to grit your teeth and say, okay, this will go away. And it will. And hopefully it won't take too long. So let me continue with Sandra's book. Um, there was one American doctor in the 1960s who was very successful in promoting the idea that a menopausal woman was, his term, a living decay, and that the salvation could be found in giving her unopposed estrogen, that's ERT, estrogen replacement therapy. His name was Robert Wilson, and he became very famous and very rich. And in 1966, wrote a bestseller called Feminine Forever. Sandra Coney actually calls him the Hugh Hefner of menopause, which I had forgotten. He had a messianic zeal about, quote, helping these poor, decaying women, or more to the point, their long suffering husbands who had to live with these unkempt, depressed drudges. So his book was not only about extolling the benefits of estrogen, he also gave advice to women how to dress and keep up their hygiene to be again, as he put it, feminine forever. Sandra's book includes some great photos of miserable looking midlife women, clearly a burden for their husbands. So now, Sheila, this is the quote you wanted to
That's
read.
right. I just love the section in her book on Robert Wilson because he was just so unbelievably misogynistic. And you really saw where his construction of menopause came from when you looked at his attitude towards women. So with my students, I used this wonderful quotation, which is in Coney's book, from his book, Feminine Forever. And it shows extraordinarily well how strong the pressure was on women to take the drugs and how insulting the woman-hating propaganda behind the medicalization was. In the new propaganda campaign today, the woman hating is more muted. It's done in a slightly different way. They wouldn't get away with quite this now, but we can see what lies behind the medicalization of menopause. So he says, once the veil is lifted, it is remarkable how quickly the previous uninitiated can detect these unfortunate women. Our streets abound with them. It is not unusual to see an erect man of 75 vigorously striding along the golf course, but never a woman of this age. Before this moderately advanced age is reached, the more intelligent woman instinctively knows her loss of physical attractiveness is entirely out of proportion. She sees the marked skin changes, the disfiguring fat deposits, the atrophy of her breasts, and beginning disappearance of her external genitals. Amazing thing is I've still got mine, so I didn't go through that bit. I've still got the genitals. If married, an irritated or inadequate vagina may bring more lasting unhappiness. All of this has a profound effect upon her psyche. Now, faced with that, who wouldn't be rushing to their doctor to try and do something about this horrendous, horrendous decline that they know they're going to go through? So the propaganda was absolutely extraordinary.
It really was, and it worked. ERT sales soared in Western countries, including New Zealand, Aotearoa, where Sandra is from. Until the mid-70s, when research published in important medical journals like the New England Journal of Medicine showed conclusively that many women on unopposed estrogen developed endometrial cancer. That's when the first miracle of estrogen therapy came to a crushing halt. But it did not stop the myth that menopausal women were diseased and in need of treatment. Although, as Coney writes, few studies actually confirmed that menopausal women themselves perceived themselves as sick, doctors, greatly supported by the media, perpetuated this myth, which survives until today. So, what actually happens when the ovaries gradually produce less estrogen? Now, the exciting news is that they still produce some androgens and also that other parts of the body take over. The adrenal glands produce androgens that are then converted into estrone by body fat cells. One of the reasons why many women start putting on weight in their 50s and beyond, specifically on their breasts and stomach. And this should be welcomed as a good thing, much better to be a bit round than a stick insect. The fat has a purpose. It is thus wrong, as many people say, that after menopause women have stopped making estrogen. Estrone is a form of estrogen and appears perfectly capable to sustain those of us who never touch HRT through the second half of our lives. So that's Sheila and me. We are perfectly fine. Now, to sum up what menopause is, Sandra Coney categorically says it is only three things. It is menstrual changes, vasomotor effects, that's hot flushes and night sweats, and loss of moisture and elasticity in the vagina. And that quite clearly could have gotten problems, could have made problems for heterosexual women with penis in vagina sex. But all these urban myths about depression and irritability and wildly erratic behaviors allegedly typical of menopausal women are just that, folklore. Or, as Sandra puts it, quote, fallacy and prejudice. She strongly suggests that women should reject the medical definition of menopause as a disease. In her words, quote, women should be able to make the passage through menopause like skippers of their own ships, under their own control. And I think that's a real nice picture because, we know that sometimes voyages on the sea can be quite difficult. So it's not to say that menopause doesn't have maybe a few difficult days or weeks, but it will pass. But wait, doctors did need to find something else to make menopause really scary and estrogen replacement therapy really necessary. It is the dreaded osteoporosis, the thinning of bones. And so we move into part 3, osteoporosis. It is one thing to feel hot and bothered, but to have your bones thinning until you break them even without falling, that is a serious threat. Sandra says that from the mid-70s onward, medicine added osteoporosis as a crucial component of menopause. It appears that two industries profited from this new addition, which the media exploited by frequently showing bent over who with a dowager hump, scaring midlife women into believing that this was their inevitable fate in old age. And you might notice that neither Sheila or I have a dowager hump, so we have somehow escaped it. The first, the first was the dairy industry. Full milk contains calcium, a vital component of bone health. Indeed, extra calcium was now added to some milk and it was promoted specifically to menopausal women. No more brittle bones, drink calcium-enriched milk. These campaigns were successful and added a lot of money to the dairy industry. Milk containing extra calcium is still sold today, but actually I haven't heard it promoted recently. The second beneficiary was the estrogen replacement therapy industry. After the drop in sale in the mid-70s because of endometrial cancer, estrogen replacement gradually kept coming back into the market. It now had a new name, hormone replacement therapy, HRT, and a new component, progesterone. Sandra devotes a whole part of the book to HRT, so more on HRT later. In terms of osteoporosis, the interaction with estrogen was, and I think remains, unclear. It is true that at the point when women stop having periods, ovaries start producing less estrogen, and conversely, bones are beginning to lose some of their substance. However, this loss, which is said to be an overall 2%, only lasts for a few years. Moreover, it is not as simple as that. Whatever bone density women have depends on their genetics, on their eating habits, on their vitamin D intake, exercise, and other factors. All these variables influence the strength of women's bones from childhood onwards. The scare of osteoporosis at menopause was and is thus highly exaggerated. But the media at the time exploited it as, quote, the crippling disease that strikes 25% of all women and, quote, leads to more deaths in older women than cancer of the cervix, ovaries, and womb combined. Sandra cautions us to believe these claims, but comments that in a culture that values women for our youthful looks, the possibility of showing our age through looking frail and breaking bones more frequently scared many women. Now, as an aside, I think the threat of osteoporosis has subsided somewhat. It definitely isn't as much part of scary menopause advertising as it was in the 80s and 90s. And I'm not sure why this is. Maybe women are being good and obedient, regularly having their bone density screened. Maybe many other women are taking drugs that are supposed to stop bone thinning, but can have serious adverse effects. Anyway, every year, both Susan and I get a letter from our medical center inviting us for free screening from the bone bus. Last year, the first sentence read, which made me just laugh out loud. "This bus is for people like you," pointing the finger at a stupid woman for not obeying the mantra that our bones must be screened yearly. Needless to say, the bus came and went and our bones remain unscreened. What relevance would an average set of data have, as they don't have a base measurement for my bone density when I was 20 or 30 years old? It just doesn't make sense. But there are many more factors that complicate the osteoporosis story. Bone density is not the only component that counts. Bones have a complicated structure that add to their stability. Again, the factors that I mentioned earlier are important. The point is that someone might have a good bone density, but a crumbling bone structure, and thus be prone to more falls and breakages, not fewer. Sandra spends the rest of part 3 on osteoporosis on detailing the different areas of the body that are most endangered by thinning or unstable bones: wrists, the spine, and hips. And this is where fat comes to the rescue again. A good measure of fat on the hips clearly prevents fractures. But she also asked the important question: how is it that we don't know what prevents 94% of the people who fall from incurring a fracture? And I'm not sure that today we are any closer to an answer to this question. However, she does add one important caution, which is very important today. Women who use the 3-monthly progestogen contraceptive injection, Depo-Provera, lose a lot of bone density. Indeed, she quotes one researcher who said that being on Depo-Provera would increase the lifetime risk of fracture by 50%. This is a very worrying statistic, given that Depo-Provera is still used as a contraceptive. It really should not. That is one important warning women should heed, and they're not being told in any kind of doctor's practice or women's health centers, if they still exist. In sum, Sandra cautions us to not let the fear of osteoporosis dominate midlife and older women's lives. And she also draws attention that many falls in older women occur because of medications that are given for other health problems. I think it's a really important point. And she suggests we all should be scrutinizing our living quarters for obstacles that might promote falls, all very down to earth. The next and final book, part of Sandra's book, is called Hormone Replacement Therapy. Under the heading, quote, "All roads lead to hormones," Sandra provides a short but fascinating history of the development of the drug industry around World War II. Once penicillin and other antibiotics were able to be commercially mass-produced in the early 1940s, the, quote, "genesis of technocracy that Sandra's term, that's a good one, provided pharmaceutical companies in Switzerland, the UK, and the US with a lot of money and power and guaranteed rapid expansion. Now, women's reproductive biology was seized upon as an important market. The contraceptive pill entered the US market as Innovit in 1960 after tests had been conducted in Puerto Rico on a mere 132 women, 3 of whom died. DES, diethylstilbestrol, a synthetic form of estrogen, was given to pregnant women for morning sickness, and it was never proven to work from the 1940s till 1971, when it transpired that the children of these women had a high chance of developing a rare form of vaginal cancer, and 3 million women took it before it was stopped. Thalidomide was another new wonder drug that led to thousands of European women giving birth to children with missing limbs. And the US was spared through the vigilance of one FDA, Food and Drug Administration employee. Drug, I didn't know that. Tranquilizers such as Librium and Valium, all aimed at women, was another giant money spinner for the pharmaceutical industry. But the first estrogen on the market that was highly successful was Premarin. It was manufactured in 1943 by IS Laboratory, collected cheaply from the urine of pregnant mares, hence the word Premarin, who were scandalously kept pregnant without a break. A terrible instance of animal cruelty that continued for at least 50 years. It's shocking. As mentioned already earlier, the use of estrogen therapy, in particular Premarin, exploded in the 1960s when Robert Wilson appeared on the scene with his hype of feminine forever for decaying midlife women. From then on, until 1975, millions of women were convinced by the doctors that they needed ERT, estrogen replacement therapy. In spite of some researchers' early warnings about endometrial cancer, the hormone craze was not stopped until serious medical journals published the research about endometrial cancer in 1975. And this reminded me of the relentless push for puberty blockers, which is ongoing in spite of a bit of a slowing down, despite a few researchers and doctors warning from the beginning that they were dangerous and not reversible. But being trumped up by an unholy alliance of US billionaires, the media, and an incredible network of pro-trans organizations such as the various WPATH, the World Professional Association for Transgender Health, EPATH, Europe, US PATH, Asia PATH, CPATH, that's Canada, OSPATH, that's Australia, and PASA, that's New Zealand. And they are still incredibly strong. Now, going back to the estrogen replacement story, when osteoporosis was added as a serious disease of menopausal women, and HRT was said to be the cure, estrogen replacement therapy was making a comeback in the 1980s and 1990s. Sandra Coney wrote The Menopause Industry in 1991. So she could not have known what would happen in 2002, when the estrogen replacement empire crashed for a second time. In 2002, parts of a very large US-based nurses study, a randomized controlled clinical trial with more than 161,000 healthy post-menopausal women aged 50 to 79 years that have been going for 15 years, called the Women's Health Initiative, WHI, was prematurely ended. The researchers had found that women taking HRT suffered an increased risk of invasive breast cancer, blood clots, strokes, and heart attacks. An ongoing million women study with 1.3 million participants published findings a year later with noteworthy increased risk of breast cancer after HRT use. Sales dropped significantly as women stopped taking this dangerous drug. Many, including us, thought this would be the final nail in the coffin of estrogen replacement treatment for menopause. A year later, more findings from the WHI study were released that also pointed to higher rates of dementia for women who had taken HRT. But never say never to the drug industry, which knows that women's bodies constitute an endless treasure trove. It was astonishing to read the following statement in 2020 in a US blog post called Focal Point Vitality. And this is a quote: "The good news is that just because your years are adding up, that doesn't mean you have to settle for feeling like an old geezer. Innovative new treatments, including hormone replacement therapy, HRT, can help you slow down the aging process and seriously ramp up your quality of life." Question: how does old geezer in 2020 differ from living decay in 1966? It was even more astonishing to read in 2024 that a respected Australian nutritionist was publicly advocating that all menopausal women should be on HRT. What was it that we had missed? Were there new studies that exonerated HRT? It wasn't hard to find out that no, there were no new studies. All that had happened was that both the WHI trial and the published results from the million women studies in 2003 were reanalyzed in 2023. And, surprise, surprise, the expert view was now that if given to younger menopausal women, ages 50 to 59, a risk-benefit analysis revealed that HRTs had beneficial effects on the cardiovascular system by reducing heart attacks. And what had happened to the documented significantly higher risks of breast cancer and the dementia in the WHI trial and the Millennium Women studies? Well, they seem to have fallen off a cliff. That is, they are not mentioned in the reanalysis. This is a good example of the continuing seesaw of medico-pharmaceutical spin on HRT. Very bad one day, a few years later, very good again. No new studies required. And it worked. Prescriptions for HRT, now rebranded MHT, menopausal hormone therapy, it's exactly the same product, are on the rise again. And articles in the mainstream press once more tell women that HRT or MHT is an excellent option for menopausal women. But interestingly, only last week, on the 20th January 26, an article in The Australian by Penny Timms announced a major new funding for the, quote, quest to unlock the mysteries of menopause and heart disease. Is so dramatic. The article contained the following interesting sentence. For many years, people believed that taking menopausal hormone therapy or HRT might prevent heart disease. She, that's Professor Hickey, said. And then she continues, But the evidence that we have from other clinical trials is that it doesn't. So there we go again, another myth dispelled. HRT does not prevent heart attack. What will come next? The estrogen replacement story never stops giving, and Sandra Coney contributed a great book to unraveling this complex topic. In her short final thoughts, she has some great advice. Quote, women need to reject an ideology which leads to a preoccupation with ill health and which inculcates a sense of precarious mortality. Instead of living gingerly, midlife women should insist on their right to live life with verve, gusto, and spice. Over to you, Sheila, now on menopause today.
Thanks. That's a lovely sentence there from Sandra, but she has many lovely sentences. So, what I'm concerned about is in the last decade or so, there's been a huge reinvention of the menopause industry. And as Renate said, they're now saying with no new studies, actually, it was wrong to associate HRT with cancer and so on. So, the feminist critique and the rejection of medicalization, I fear, has been forgotten. You barely hear any criticism of the idea of or of the practice of medicalized menopause today. There are no books like those of Coney or Greer, but it's not just an absence that is the problem. That is the shortness of feminist memory. The problem is that a whole very profitable and complex edifice of menopause has been constructed that never existed before. And it is truly extraordinary. So something's going on here. We need a feminist analysis of what the hell is going on around menopause now. It's truly shocking. So the notion that menopause is a disability that requires treatment, or at least special consideration, has spread far beyond doctor surgeries into the heart of the workplace, with the adoption of special requirements of employers, such as giving women extra time off because of their disability. All these considerations construct a view of women as persons hampered by their biology, rather than women who are coming into a period of their lives where they are particularly effective, which I believe actually is the situation for these midlife women. Why would employers seek out such persons? You know, if you're hiring somebody, do you want someone with this disability? I mean, this is a problem feminists have always pointed out, that women are seen as not really suitable. If they were finding it particularly hard to find workers and were forced to consider women, I suspect they are not going to choose those with a disability and with whom there's special requirements and so on and so on. Now, the requirements come from government level down into the workplace. Yes, from government. That's extraordinary, isn't it? Key initiatives of the government in the UK include requiring large employers to have menopause action plans by 2027. I find this so absolutely gobsmacking when the rest of us, you know, in the 70s, 80s, 90s, just went through menopause and out the other side and carried on being very effective. Now, employers must have menopause action plans. And they've appointed a menopause employment ambassador. Completely extraordinary. I've got just one example I'm going to show you today of the special codes of practice towards women disabled by the menopause that are being introduced. This is seen as being pro-woman and feminist, but in fact, it is pretend feminism that actually, I would argue, very much disadvantages women. So can we have the next slide, Joe? Okay, so this is from ACAS, the Advisory, Conciliation and Arbitration Service. Now, this is a UK government body, so this just describes some of the ways that menopause is to be treated. Managing the effects of menopause at work is important for both employers and their staff. This is incredible stuff, really incredible. For those experiencing symptoms, it can be a difficult and stressful time. No, you should all laugh and saying, I'm having a power surge, but no, not now. Everyone will experience the menopause differently, and for some, symptoms can be quite severe and can affect people both physically and mentally. If the menopause is a natural stage of life, the menopause is a natural stage of life which affects most women and other people who have a menstrual cycle. Other people, you notice, because there are other people who are not women who have menstrual cycles, because we've got all the silliness in there. This can include some people who are transgender, have variations in sex characteristics. Some people might use the terms intersex or differences in sexual development. It can include people who are non-binary. Someone who's non-binary does not see themselves as exclusively a man or a woman. So all the hideous transgender type propaganda is in there, and we're supposed to believe that actually menopause is not just something that is about women. Menopause, of course, only affects women. That's definitely the case, but not for the government and not for workplaces now. Now, it does seem likely that all of this has been created at the behest of drug companies who want to get more women on HRT. It seems that the purpose is to create a kind of menopause panic. Women and co-workers need to look out because it could happen anytime. It could apparently be lurking around the corner. Goodness, there could be menopause around that corner. This is so much the opposite of what we tried to do as feminists in the 1990s, which was to normalize menopause as just a life stage that was unlikely to be more than an annoying and brief stage of a woman's life. Can we have the last slide here, Joe? So ACAS says it's important for employers to be aware that the menopause and its symptoms can affect staff at any time. You're going about your daily business and suddenly, cannot continue. Being aware of this can help staff continue to do their job confidently and effectively. The menopause can also have an impact on those supporting someone going through the menopause, for example, a relative, a partner, colleague, or carer. So it's so serious that you have to have special helpers supporting women get through it. I mean, this is completely extraordinary. It is the construction of a disability. Although menopause will only be experienced by women and other people who have a menstrual cycle, men should also be included in conversations and training. This is because they might be supporting others going through it. So men have to be there supporting women going through the menopause because this is a disability that has to be supported, and women are being told by the government and in the workplace that this is the case. I mean, it's kind of absolutely extraordinary. And of course, it will force women out of the workplaces in the end. There was a piece in The Guardian just a couple of days ago about how at the BBC women presenters can't really stay on after 60, but we can have men in their 90s. There is huge prejudice against women in the workplace. They're seen as not being attractive and so on, all of which helps to construct the problem of menopause. So all of it sounds scary. Menopause could be lurking anywhere and affect anyone. And what is all the support that we're supposed to get from men? Do women really want men in special meetings about menopause? This is making menopause into a huge burden and emergency in women's lives. Once upon a time, women aimed to be taken seriously in the workplace, not as invalids, but as equals. Imagine that. There's a huge amount on the net about how menopause makes women into invalids, unfit for work, and so on. I Googled menopause resources in the town where I live to see how large the edifice of menopause now was. There were many. There were menopause clinics, private, where there were potential 75-minute appointments, which would be very expensive. There was a menopause support group at the Women's Centre and a menopause cafe online, which is part of an international menopause cafe movement. It's hard to imagine that once we had a women's liberation movement, and now we have a menopause movement. We need some good feminist books on menopause again to combat the propaganda.
Absolutely, Sheila. And I just remember, when we said menopause means give men a pause. There was a slogan that was around at the time, but obviously that is being forgotten now that men are being told that they have to support us, in our workplaces. So it's a very sober ending. Sandra Coney wrote a fantastic book, 1991. There really isn't another book about this. I have included a chapter which I wrote in 1992 on menopause in my book, Radical Reckonings. But that's really only a drop on the in the ocean. We do need another book, but I do not know who is going to write it. We are up against so much, and I really thought, it's hard to sort of say, why do women fall for this? But I don't really want to blame women because young women have grown up without any support from women's studies, for instance, or other political feminist courses. There's hardly anything around. And so they're falling totally for this patronizing shit that comes from the medicine that tells them that it's the old story, it's all for their own good. And so in a way, Sheila and I think I can speak for you, Sheila, that why is this happening? Why don't women sit up and say, no, sorry, I look at my own body and I follow the signs of my body and I don't need all of this. Why is it that women fall medicalization? It's really distressing because women haven't got a sense about our bodies ourselves, that women are bodies that's really precious. We have to hang on to this. If you suggest to women today that they should, use a speculum to look at their cervix, I think most young women will just faint and think, oh, no, I couldn't possibly even do that. So it's hard not to despair and not to be sort of positive and think, well, we will see change. It's just around the corner, like menopause is just around the corner. It's a really serious problem. We need to discuss this and we need to find resistance coming from somewhere. And at this point, I really don't know where the resistance is coming from. I just really want to say to young and younger women, especially menopausal women, just, just stop it. Just remember who you are. Don't give in into this, dangerous drugs, because they are dangerous drugs.
Yes, they are.